The private jet touched down at Haneda Airport just after dawn, its sleek silver body glinting in the pale Tokyo light. Inside, the man who owned the jet, billionaire CEO of one of America's fastest-growing tech empires, was already pacing the narrow aisle like a caged lion. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, but exhaustion wasn't what had his hands shaking. It was the meeting. The one happening in less than 3 hours. The one that could make or break his company's future. He'd spent the last 18 months chasing this deal. A partnership with Matsuda Industries, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms across Asia. Old money, deep roots, unshakable reputation. And now, after endless negotiations, legal reviews, and late-night calls across time zones, everything came down to this morning. One final face-to-face with the Matsuda family elders in their Tokyo headquarters. If they signed, his company would double in value overnight. If they walked away, well, he didn't want to think about that. His team was already on the ground prepping the conference room in the Matsuda Tower. Lawyers had triple-checked every clause. PR had rehearsed every possible media angle. And his interpreter, his golden ticket, was supposed to meet him at the hotel lobby at 7 a.m. sharp. Hiroshi Tanaka wasn't just fluent. He'd worked with Japanese conglomerates for 20 years. He knew how to say no without saying no, how to soften demands into suggestions, how to read the silence between words, the kind of silence that could mean agreement or quiet rejection. But when the CEO stepped into the marble lobby of the Imperial Hotel, Hiroshi wasn't there. He checked his watch. 7:03 a.m., he called. Straight to voicemail, he texted. No reply. Panic, cold and sharp, started creeping up his spine. He paced near the concierge desk, trying to stay calm, but his mind raced. What if Hiroshi got stuck in traffic? What if he missed his train? Tokyo's subway was efficient, but not infallible. Still, Hiroshi was never late. Never. At 7:15, his phone buzzed. It was his head of operations, voice tight with alarm. Sir, it's Hiroshi. He's in the hospital. What? Why? Severe allergic reaction. Something he ate last night. They say he's stable, but he won't be able to speak clearly for at least 48 hours. His throat's swollen. The CEO froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. No, he whispered. Not today. Not today. He looked around the lobby as if the answer might appear in the polished floor or the potted bonsai trees. He knew maybe 10 words in Japanese. Hello? Thank you. Excuse me. Where's the bathroom? Useless in a high-stakes negotiation where a single misphrased sentence could be seen as disrespectful. And in Japanese business culture, respect wasn't just polite, it was everything. He called his assistant in New York. Find me another interpreter. Now. We've tried, sir. Everyone's booked. It's summit week. Half the Fortune 500 is in Tokyo. The few freelancers available don't have clearance for this level of confidentiality. He ran a hand through his hair, heart pounding. The Matsuda meeting was at 9 a.m., less than 2 hours away. He couldn't reschedule. The eldest Matsuda brother, a man in his late 70s who still wore a three-piece suit every day, had made it clear. We meet when we say we meet. Or we do not meet at all. Back in the car heading to the tower, he stared out the window at the blur of neon signs and orderly streets. Tokyo felt alien, impenetrable. He'd built an empire on data, speed, disruption. But here, in this city of quiet rituals and unspoken rules, none of that mattered. He was just a loud American with no way to speak. When he arrived at Matsuda Tower, a gleaming structure of glass and steel that somehow still felt ancient, he was met by his team in the lobby. Their faces said it all. Nervous. Defeated. One of his lawyers handed him a printed cheat sheet of basic Japanese phrases. He shoved it in his pocket without looking. Upstairs, the boardroom was ready. Long table. Perfectly aligned chairs. Bottles of mineral water chilled. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out like a circuit board come to life. But the room felt like a tomb. At 8:45, the Matsuda executives began arriving. 3 men in dark suits moving with unhurried grace. They bowed slightly upon entering, exchanged quiet words, and took their seats without a glance at the empty chair beside the CEO, the interpreter's seat. The CEO forced a smile, bowed deeper than necessary, and said, Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. The eldest Matsuda gave a small, polite nod, but his eyes flicked to the empty chair. Then back to the CEO. A silent question. Minutes ticked by. First in 8:55, the CEO's palms were slick with sweat. He cleared his throat. We're just waiting on our interpreter. He had a medical issue. He spoke in English, hoping one of them understood. One did, a younger executive, but he only translated briefly in Japanese. The elder Matsuda's expression didn't change, but the air grew heavier. At 8:58, the CEO knew it was over. He'd come all this way, risked everything, and now he'd lose it because he couldn't even talk to the people across the table. He thought about his investors, his employees, the thousands of people counting on this deal. Shame burned in his chest. Just then the door opened softly. Not one of his team. Not a Matsuda aide. A man in a navy blue maintenance uniform, pushing a quiet cart with cleaning supplies. He was older, black with calm eyes and a neat mustache. He moved with quiet purpose, clearly there to prep the room post-meeting. But when he saw the tension, the CEO standing stiffly, the Matsuda men waiting in silence, he paused. He didn't interrupt. Didn't speak. Just watched for a moment. Then very gently he set his cart aside and stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a low, steady voice. American accent, but warm, unhurried. "I couldn't help but notice. You're missing your interpreter." The CEO blinked. Yeah, I am. He's in the hospital." The man nodded slowly. "I see." He glanced at the Matsuda executives, then back. "I speak Japanese fluent, if you'd like." "I could help." The CEO stared at him. This man cleaned floors. He wore rubber-soled shoes and a name tag that read Facilities Level 5. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't part of the corporate theater. And yet, there was something in his voice. A certainty. A calm that the CEO hadn't felt all morning. He wanted to say no. This was too important, too risky. But what choice did he have? The clock read 8:59. He swallowed hard. You really speak Japanese?" "Yes, sir. 30 years in this country. And you know business Japanese. Honorifics? Formal speech?" The man gave a small, knowing smile. "I've interpreted for professors, diplomats, and once a sumo stable master. I think I can manage." The CEO looked at the Matsuda elder, who was now watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. He took a deep breath. This was either the dumbest decision of his life, or the only one that might save it. "Okay," he said, voice tight. "Please, help us." The man nodded, straightened his shoulders slightly, not with arrogance, but with quiet readiness, and walked toward the empty chair. As he passed the CEO, he said softly, "Don't worry. Just speak clearly. I'll handle the rest." And for the first time that morning, the CEO felt something other than panic. He felt hope. The janitor didn't rush. He didn't fumble. He simply pulled out the interpreter's chair, sat down with quiet dignity, and turned to the Matsuda executives with a respectful nod. "Hajimemashite," he said smoothly. "Watashi wa kyou donoho no tsuyaku toshite sousaku itashimasu. Nice to meet you. I'll be serving as interpreter for this meeting today." The eldest Matsuda raised an eyebrow just slightly but said nothing. His gaze lingered on the man's uniform for a beat too long, then shifted to the American CEO, who was still standing awkwardly by his chair, unsure whether to sit or apologize again. "Please," the janitor said gently, in English this time, "take your seat, sir. They're ready." The CEO sat, heart still hammering. He watched as the janitor placed his hands flat on the table, calm and steady. No notes, no earpiece, just presence. The meeting began with formal greetings, lengthy, layered with titles and honorifics that the CEO only half understood. But the janitor translated each phrase with precision, matching the tone of the Matsuda men, formal when needed, warm when appropriate, never stiff, never rushed. When the eldest Matsuda asked a question about Nexa Global's long-term vision in Asia, the CEO launched into his usual pitch, fast, confident, full of numbers and buzzwords like disruption and scale. Halfway through, the janitor raised a hand slightly, not to stop him, but as a quiet signal. Then in Japanese, he didn't just repeat the words, he reshaped them. "Nexa Global deeply respects Matsuda's legacy," he said, voice low and measured. "They believe their technology can support, not replace, your traditions, and they're committed to learning from your wisdom as they grow in this region." The change was subtle, but the effect was immediate. The Matsuda executives exchanged glances. The tension in their shoulders eased. The youngest of them even gave a small nod. The CEO stared. He hadn't said any of that, but somehow it was exactly what needed to be said. As the discussion moved to contract terms, things got trickier. The Matsuda side proposed a clause about shared oversight of data ethics, a sensitive topic. The CEO, frustrated by what he saw as unnecessary bureaucracy, leaned forward and said bluntly, "We can't have outside control over our algorithms. That's non-negotiable." In the silence that followed, the CEO realized his mistake. In American boardrooms, that kind of directness was seen as strong. But here, it felt like a door slamming shut. But before the mood could sour, the janitor spoke, not in English but in Japanese, his voice calm as still water. "Nexa Global holds their core technology in the highest regard," he said. "And they understand Matsuda's concern comes from a place of deep responsibility. Perhaps we might explore a joint advisory panel, where both sides share insights, not authority, so trust can be built step by step." The phrasing was gentle, collaborative. It turned a no into an invitation. The eldest Matsuda leaned back slightly, considering. Then he gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "So desuna," he murmured. "Yes, that makes sense." The CEO exhaled quietly. He hadn't just avoided disaster. He'd gained ground. Minutes passed. The conversation flowed smoother now. The janitor didn't just translate words. He read the room like a musician reads a score. When one Matsuda executive hesitated before answering, the janitor paused too, giving space. When the CEO grew too animated, the janitor softened his tone in translation, turning enthusiasm into respect. He even caught a cultural landmine the CEO never saw coming, when the American casually mentioned moving fast and breaking things, a phrase he'd used 1,000 times. The janitor quickly added in Japanese, "Of course they mean improving systems with care, not actual disruption to people or process." The Matsuda men smiled faintly. One even chuckled. By the time the tea break was called, served by a silent attendant in a crisp kimono, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What began as a tense, almost doomed meeting now felt like the start of a real partnership. As the Matsuda executive stepped out to the terrace for fresh air, the CEO turned to the janitor, eyes wide. How did you do that?" The man shrugged, but there was no false modesty in it. "Just quiet truth. You speak their language with your mouth," he said. "I speak it with my ears, my eyes, my heart. Japanese business isn't just about what's said. It's about what's not said, and how you hold the silence." The CEO sat back, stunned. He'd spent millions on consultants, flown first class across oceans, hired the best legal minds, and the person who saved everything wore a uniform with a company logo on the chest and rubber-soled shoes. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. The janitor looked out the window at the Tokyo skyline, his expression softening. "I came here in '92. Fell in love with a woman from Kyoto. She taught me everything, how to bow, how to listen, how to sit still when the world wants you to rush." He paused. "She passed 10 years ago. Cancer. After that, well, life got hard. I lost my teaching job. Couldn't afford rent in the city. Took whatever work I could find. You were a teacher. Linguistics. At a small university outside Osaka. I taught English, French, even some Swahili. But after she was gone, I didn't have the heart for classrooms anymore. So I cleaned. First hotels, then offices. This building for the last 12 years. The CEO didn't know what to say. He'd walked past people like this man 1,000 times. Invisible background noise in the grand theater of business. He'd never once wondered what stories they carried. "You didn't have to help me," he said finally. "You could have just kept cleaning." The janitor met his eyes. "Maybe not. But when I saw you standing there, lost, scared, trying so hard, I remembered my first year here. I walked into a bank once, didn't know the right way to greet the clerk. I bowed too low, used the wrong phrase. They laughed. Not cruelly, but I felt small, like I didn't belong." He paused. "No one should feel that way in a room full of people, especially when they're trying to do something good." The CEO looked down at his expensive watch, then at the janitor's worn hands, clean but calloused. He felt a strange mix of shame and gratitude. The Matsuda men returned. The meeting resumed, and this time the CEO spoke slower, listened more, asked questions instead of making statements. And every time he spoke, the janitor translated, not just his words, but his growing respect. By the end of the hour, the deal wasn't just back on track, It was stronger. The Matsuda elder stood, bowed deeply, and said something in Japanese that made the janitor smile. He says, the janitor translated, that your company has good bones, and that you're lucky to have someone who understands both worlds. The CEO knew he wasn't talking about him. As the Matsuda team left, promising to send the final papers by evening, the CEO turned to the janitor. I owe you everything, the man shook his head. You owe me nothing, but maybe next time. Don't wait until the last minute to see who's really in the room with you. He picked up his cart, gave a small nod, not a bow but something just as respectful, and wheeled it toward the door. The CEO watched him go, the squeak of the cart's wheels echoing in the quiet room. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire, he just felt human. The deal was signed by lunchtime. Not just signed, celebrated. The Matsuda team invited the American CEO and his staff to a quiet kaiseki restaurant tucked away in a garden behind the tower. The kind of place you couldn't find on Google Maps. Sliding paper doors, tatami mats, food served on handmade ceramic plates. It was an honor, and everyone knew it. But as the others toasted with sake and exchanged business cards with careful two-handed gestures, the CEO kept glancing toward the service entrance. He hadn't seen the janitor since the meeting ended. He'd asked a Matsuda aide where he'd gone, but the man only bowed and said he returned to his duties. Now, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, sipping warm green tea, the CEO felt restless. The success tasted sweet, but it didn't feel complete. He kept hearing the janitor's voice, calm, steady, turning panic into possibility. He couldn't just walk away like nothing happened. After the meal, he excused himself, thanked the Matsuda executives again, and headed back to the tower. He rode the elevator down to the lower service level, the part of the building most executives never saw. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and damp concrete. Down a narrow hallway, he heard the soft swish of a mop. There he was, pushing a bucket on wheels, sleeves rolled up, wiping down a handrail with slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up when he heard footsteps, and for a moment surprise flickered in his eyes. Then he nodded. Sir, I didn't expect to see you down here. I couldn't leave without talking to you, the CEO said. Not after what you did. The man set the mop aside. I just spoke a language. That's all. You did more than that, the CEO insisted. You saved a $2 billion deal with your words. With your understanding. That's not just anything. The janitor wiped his hands on a towel tucked in his belt. Maybe, but deals come and go. People stay, or they don't. He looked out a small high window at the Tokyo sky. Gray now, threatening rain. I've seen big men come through these halls, CEOs, ministers, celebrities. They smile for the cameras, shake hands, sign papers, then vanish. Never remember the faces that kept the lights on while they dreamed. The CEO felt that like a punch. He'd been one of those men. Too many times I want to remember, he said quietly. And I want you to know this changes things for me, for my company. The janitor studied him for a long moment, not with suspicion, but with the kind of patience that comes from years of watching people prove themselves or not. All right, he said finally. Then let's talk. But not here. He gestured to a small break room down the hall, just a table, a microwave, a coffee pot, and a calendar with handwritten notes in the margins. They sat on plastic chairs. Rain began to patter against the window. The CEO leaned forward. What's your story? Really? And so, over weak vending machine coffee, the man spoke. He'd grown up in Chicago, the son of a postal worker and a school cafeteria cook. Loved languages since high school. Picked up Spanish from neighbors, French from library books. Got a scholarship to a state university. Majored in linguistics. After graduation, he taught English abroad, first in Senegal, then in Thailand. That's where he met his wife, a Japanese aid worker visiting on a medical mission. They fell in love over shared meals and late-night talks about home, belonging, and how language could build bridges, or walls. They moved to Japan together. He got a job teaching at a small college. She worked with a non-profit helping elderly citizens navigate healthcare. For 15 years, life was full, quiet, meaningful, rooted. Then she got sick, fast, aggressive. The medical bills piled up. Japan's system helped, but not enough for experimental treatments. He sold their apartment, their car, even his books. Still not enough. She passed in her sleep, holding his hand. After that, the university let his contract lapse. Budget cuts, they said. Truth was, he'd missed too many classes while caring for her. He applied everywhere. But at 53, with grief in his eyes and no corporate experience, doors stayed closed. So he took work where he could. Night shifts at a hotel laundry. Day porter at a department store. 12 years ago, he got hired at Matsuda Tower. Not as staff, but through a third-party cleaning service. Minimum wage. No benefits. But it was steady, and the building felt familiar, like it held memories in its walls. I never stopped learning, he said. Even while mopping floors, I'd listen to NHK radio, read newspapers in the break room, practice calligraphy on scrap paper. Language isn't just a job, it's how I stay connected to her, to who I am. The CEO sat very still. He thought about his own life. Private jets, penthouse views, assistants who scheduled his breathing. He'd built an empire, but had he built a life? Had he ever truly seen anyone who wasn't useful to him? You're one of the smartest people I've ever met, he said. And you've been invisible to people like me for years. The janitor smiled faintly. Not invisible, just overlooked. There's a difference. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The break room felt like a sanctuary, small, ordinary, real. I want to fix that, the CEO said. Not just for you. For others like you, people with skills, stories, dignity, but no platform. The janitor raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to do that? Hire every janitor in Tokyo as a consultant? No, the CEO said, leaning in. But I can start by offering you a real role. In my company. Not as a favor. As a partner. You'd advise on global communications, cultural strategy, training our teams. You'd have an office, a team, a voice at the table. The man didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee, though it was long cold. Why? He asked simply. Because I saved your deal today? Because you showed me what I've been missing, the CEO said. Efficiency without empathy is just noise. Speed without understanding is just chaos. You taught me that in 1 hour. Still, the janitor hesitated. I'm not a corporate man. I don't wear suits. I don't do PowerPoints. You don't have to, the CEO said. Be yourself. That's exactly what we need. A long silence. Then slowly the man nodded. All right. But on one condition. Name it. That you don't make this about me being a janitor who made good. That's a story people tell to feel better about ignoring others. I didn't rise from the floor. I was always here, capable, ready. You just finally looked. The CEO met his gaze. Deal. They shook hands, not the firm. Performative grip of business, but a quiet clasp, palm to palm, like two people meeting for the first time. As they stood to leave, the janitor picked up his mop again. I still have 2 more floors to clean tonight. Let me help, the CEO said impulsively. The man chuckled. You don't know how to wring a mop? Then teach me. And so, for the next 20 minutes, the billionaire CEO of a global tech firm stood in a service corridor in Tokyo, learning how to clean a floor properly, wringing the mop with both hands, moving in straight lines, rinsing the water when it turned gray. It was the most honest work he'd done in years. When they finished, the janitor handed him a clean towel. Now you know, the world runs on people who show up, even when no one's watching. The CEO folded the towel carefully. I'll remember that. And for the first time, he meant it. Back in San Francisco, the office buzzed with the usual energy. Keyboards clacking, screens glowing, people rushing between meetings with coffee in hand. But something felt different. Not in the air exactly, but in the way people looked at each other. Slower. More carefully. Like they were seeing faces, not just roles. It had been 3 weeks since Tokyo. The deal with Matsuda was finalized. And the press release called it a landmark partnership built on mutual respect. But inside the company, the real story was spreading quietly. The CEO had come back changed. And it had everything to do with the man in the blue uniform. Now, that man sat in a sunlit corner office on the 22nd floor. No corner suite, no glass walls. Just a modest room with bookshelves, a small desk, and a framed photo of a woman smiling under cherry blossoms. He still wore simple clothes, button-down shirts, dark slacks, but no uniform. And when people passed his open door, they often paused, not out of curiosity, but because he always looked up, smiled, and said hello like he meant it. The CEO hadn't just hired him. He'd listened. Really listened. They'd spent days talking, not in boardrooms but in cafes, parks, even the company cafeteria. The janitor, now officially the senior advisor for global cultural integrity, didn't want a fancy title. He wanted impact. Don't just fix one deal, he'd said. Fix how you see people. So they started small. The CEO canceled the next round of efficiency cuts that would have outsourced all cleaning and maintenance staff to a faceless contractor. Instead, he brought those workers in-house, gave them benefits, and invited them to quarterly town halls. At first, they sat in the back silent. But after the advisor spoke, calmly, respectfully, about how every role keeps the company alive, something shifted. A woman who'd mopped floors for 10 years raised her hand and suggested better lighting in the basement corridors. Her idea was implemented the next week. Then came the training. Not the usual corporate slides about diversity, but real conversations. The advisor led sessions where executives practiced listening without interrupting, where interns learned how to greet colleagues in 5 different languages, where everyone was asked, "Who do you overlook every day and why?" It wasn't always smooth. Some managers rolled their eyes. "We're here to build software, not hold hands," one muttered. But the CEO heard about it and called that manager into his office. Not to fire him, but to ask, "When was the last time you thanked the person who empties your trash?" The question stuck. One afternoon, the CEO found the advisor sitting alone in the quiet room they'd set aside for reflection, a space with soft chairs, plants, and no screens. He was reading a worn paperback, fingers tracing the lines like they held secrets. "Mind if I join?" the CEO asked. "Always room," the advisor said, closing the book gently. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fog roll in over the bay. Finally, the CEO spoke. "I keep thinking about that morning in Tokyo, how I almost lost everything because I couldn't see past my own panic." "Or your uniform," the advisor nodded. "Fear makes us blind. Success makes us lazy. It's easy to think the world revolves around your office when you've never had to clean it. But you never resented it," the CEO said, "even after everything you'd been through." "I did at first," the advisor admitted. "After my wife passed, I felt invisible, like my life didn't matter anymore. But then I realized cleaning wasn't beneath me. It was honest. Every floor I mopped, every window I wiped was a small act of care. Someone would walk on that floor, look out that window, and feel a little better. That's not nothing." The CEO thought about his own work, the endless chase for growth, the pressure to outperform, the loneliness at the top. "I built an empire," he said quietly, "but I never built a home." The advisor looked at him not with pity, but with understanding. Maybe it's not too late. That week, the CEO did something he hadn't done in years. He walked through every floor of the building, not with his security detail, not on his way to a meeting, but slowly, stopping to talk. He asked the security guard about his daughter's college plans. He thanked the kitchen staff for remembering his coffee order. He even helped a new intern carry boxes to her desk. People noticed. Not because he made a show of it, but because he seemed present. Then came the harder part. The advisor suggested they visit the cleaning crew's night shift, not as a photo op, but as guests. So one Tuesday at 10 p.m., the CEO showed up in jeans and a sweater, carrying a tray of warm bento boxes from a local spot the advisor recommended. The crew was surprised, then wary. But the advisor was there, speaking softly in Tagalog to one woman, Spanish to another, Japanese to the team lead. He introduced the CEO not as the boss, but as a friend who wants to learn. Over shared food in the dimly lit break room, stories came out. A man talked about sending money home to his village in the Philippines. A woman shared how she studied coding at night after her shift. Another spoke about raising 3 kids alone after her husband left. The CEO listened. Really listened. No notes, no agenda. Just presence. When they left, he turned to the advisor. "I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," the advisor said gently. "Systems are built to keep people like me out of sight. But that doesn't mean we're not essential." The next morning, the CEO called an emergency leadership meeting, not about profits or product launches, but about people. He announced a new initiative, the Hidden Talent Program. It would identify skilled workers in overlooked roles, janitors, drivers, cafeteria staff, and offer them pathways to training, mentorship, and internal mobility. No resumes required. Just potential. Some executives pushed back. It's not scalable. It's not our core business. But the CEO stood firm. Our core business is people. Always has been. Word spread beyond the company. A local news outlet picked up the story. Not as a feel-good fluff piece, but as a quiet challenge to corporate culture. Other CEOs called skeptical at first, then curious. One even flew in to meet the advisor. Through it all, the advisor stayed grounded. He still took the bus to work. Still ate lunch in the cafeteria. Still corrected interns when they mispronounced arigato. But now, when he walked through the halls, people didn't just nod. They stopped to ask his advice. Not because of his title, but because of his wisdom. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop garden watching the city lights come on, the CEO turned to him. "You've changed everything." The advisor shook his head. "I just reminded you what was already there. Kindness, respect, attention, you were just too busy to notice." The CEO smiled. "Well, I'm noticing now, and for the first time in a long time." He believed he was building something that would last, not because of money or market share, but because it was built on people who finally saw each other. 5 years later, the office didn't look much different from the outside. Same glass tower, same busy street below, same stream of people in suits and sneakers rushing in and out. But inside, something had shifted, not in the furniture or the layout, but in the air. There was a quiet hum of respect, a rhythm of listening before speaking, a sense that everyone, from the receptionist to the CEO, belonged. The man who once cleaned floors now had an office near the center of the building. Not the biggest, not the fanciest, but always open. The door never closed unless someone needed privacy. On his desk sat a small wooden plaque hand-carved by a student he'd mentored. See the person, not the role. He wasn't just an advisor anymore. He'd become a teacher, a bridge, a steady voice in a world that often shouted. Every Tuesday, he ran a language and culture circle in the main conference room, open to anyone. Janitors, coders, interns, even visiting partners from overseas sat together, practicing greetings, sharing stories, learning how to say "I see you" in more than just words. The CEO, still at the helm, but softer now, slower, made it a point to attend whenever he could. He no longer led with data first. He led with questions. How are you, really? What do you need? Who haven't we listened to yet? The partnership with Matsuda Industries had grown into a decade-long collaboration, now spanning sustainable tech and community education. And every year, without fail, the Matsuda elder sent a handwritten letter, not to the CEO but to the advisor. The latest one read, "Your presence turned a transaction into a friendship. Japan thanks you." But the real legacy wasn't in deals or letters. It was in the people. There was the young woman from the night cleaning crew who joined the Hidden Talent program, learned data analysis during her off hours, and now led a team building ethical AI tools. She still kept a mop in her closet, she said, to remind me where I started and who helped me rise. There was the security guard who'd gone back to school with company support and now taught conflict resolution workshops for new hires. Used to just watch people come and go, he'd say. Now I help them understand each other. And then there were the quiet moments no press release could capture. A cafeteria worker teaching executives how to fold dumplings during lunch break. A driver sharing folk songs from his village in Ghana during company retreats. A group of employees gathering after work to help a colleague fill out immigration paperwork. None of it was forced. It just grew, like roots spreading under soil, unseen but strong. One spring morning, the advisor stood in front of a new group of interns, all fresh out of college, full of ideas and nervous energy. He didn't give a lecture. He just asked one question. When you walk into a room, who do you notice first and who do you overlook? Silence. Then hands slowly rose. Honest answers followed. The person in the suit. The one talking loudest. The one who looks like me. He nodded. That's human. But leadership isn't about seeing what's obvious. It's about seeing what's hidden and honoring it. After the session, a young man hung back. He'd been quiet all morning. My dad cleans office buildings at night, he said, voice low. He never thought his work mattered much. The advisor looked at him gently. Tell him it does. Tell him someone sees him. The intern's eyes welled up. I will. Later that day, the CEO found the advisor on the rooftop garden, the same spot where they'd stood years ago. Cherry blossoms drifted down from a small tree they'd planted together, a gift from the Matsuda family. "You've built something beautiful here," the CEO said. The advisor smiled. "We did, but it's not mine. It's ours, and it only works if we keep tending it." They sat on a bench watching the city breathe below. No urgency, no agenda. Just two men who'd learned that real success isn't measured in billions but in belonging. A few weeks after that, the advisor announced he'd be stepping back from daily duties. Not retiring, never that, but shifting focus. He'd accepted a role with a nonprofit that supported displaced workers and late-career professionals with untapped skills. He'd still consult, still mentor, but his time would now stretch beyond one company, one city. At his farewell gathering, the room was packed, not just with executives, but with kitchen staff, drivers, security, interns, even former employees who'd flown in from other states. No speeches, just stories. One woman shared how he'd stayed late to help her practice Japanese before a family trip to meet her fiancé's parents. A young coder talked about how he'd calmed his panic during his first big presentation with a simple, "Breathe. You belong here." The CEO simply said, "He didn't just save a deal. He saved me from myself." When it was his turn, the advisor stood quietly. "I never wanted to be a hero," he said. "I just wanted to be seen. And in being seen, I hope I helped others see each other." Then he did something unexpected. He handed the CEO a small worn notebook, the kind with lined pages and a frayed cover. "This was my wife's," he said. "She wrote in it every day. Thoughts, recipes, little joys. After she passed, it kept me going. Now I want you to have it. Write your own story in it. One of humility, of care." The CEO took it with both hands like it was sacred. "I will." Months later, that notebook sat on his desk, open to a new page. On it, in careful handwriting, he'd written, "Greatness isn't in the title you hold, but in the dignity you give others." And every morning, before checking emails or joining calls, he read it. Years passed. The company grew but never lost its soul. The Hidden Talent program expanded globally, helping thousands find new paths. The advisor's language circles became a model adopted by schools and businesses worldwide. He never sought fame, just impact. One afternoon, a reporter asked him, "What's the secret to your influence?" He chuckled. "I didn't influence anyone. I just showed up as myself," and reminded others that their ordinary might be someone else's lifeline. Back in Tokyo, the Matsuda Tower still stood tall. And on the 5th floor, near the service corridor, a small plaque had been added to the wall, unofficial but honored by all who worked there. It read, "In this hallway, a quiet act of courage changed everything. No names, no titles. Just truth, because sometimes the most powerful voices aren't the loudest. They're the ones we almost didn't hear."